Anna Chapman's descent into espionage began before she was even born, with her father, Vasily Kushchenko, who'd been spying for the Russian government when the KGB was their primary intelligence agency. Alex Chapman, Anna's ex-husband, described his former father-in-law as your typical secretive spy type. He went on to say that he's not surprised about his ex-wife. Alex recalls Chapman telling him on many occasions how much she admired her father and the career he'd made for himself. Alex was always skeptical of Anna's admiration of her father, and in 2010, his doubts were realized after Chapman's arrest. However, before the arrest, the trial, and the inevitable fame, very few people knew what Chapman was doing in the U.S., including Alex, who had separated and divorced from Chapman in 2006. Chapman moved to the U.S. in 2009. On paper and LinkedIn, Chapman moved to the Big Apple to sell international real estate through her website Property Finder. To look businessy, Chapman even rented out a swanky apartment 1 block from the financial capital of the world, Wall Street. However, according to Alex, who maintained contact with his ex years after the divorce, Chapman once confessed to him that her business was deep in debt. Nevertheless, that same year, Chapman's company boasted some startling numbers. One report supposedly said Property Finder had 50 employees, a far cry from the 0 employees she started with when Chapman first arrived in New York. The number seemed too good to be true. Anyone who's ever started a business knows that growth is slow and steady. So what was Chapman really doing in Manhattan? To answer that question, first we need to go over what the Illegals program is. In the early 90s, the entire Russian government, known then as the Soviet Union, fell along with the KGB. Though the infamous Cold War was over, the new Russian Federation, primarily led by Vladimir Putin, still saw their rival across the pond as a threat. So, they created an intelligence program from scratch called the Illegals Program. The program was designed for one purpose: to obtain key information from the United States using trained Russian citizens. Before the so-called illegals were sent over to the United States, the SVR, Russia's foreign security agency, trained each operative in foreign languages, primarily English. Most importantly, the SVR trained the illegals in code sending and receiving. The code training was extensive and, to put it frankly, old school, like Cold War era old school. The program focused on 3 messaging methods: sending Morse code messages and shortwave cipher operations. One question remains though: why are they called illegals? As it so happens, some legal spies can gather certain kinds of intelligence under diplomatic immunity. The only drawback with being a legal spy is you're limited to where you can go and who you can talk to, whereas an illegal can go wherever they please because no one knows they're spies. And since no other governments were aware, the spies were illegal. Chapman and a Russian government official met every Wednesday. Sometimes they would meet at a coffee shop, other times a bookstore. However, Chapman and the official never actually met one another face to face. Instead, the official would pull up in a van, usually right out front, park, get his laptop out, and start working. It's common for people to park outside of places with free Wi-Fi like coffee shops and bookstores. Except the official in the van wasn't using the business's Wi-Fi. They were using a private network from inside the building, a network belonging to Chapman. Since the server was private, no one else could access it except Chapman and the official in the van. Compared to her peers, Chapman's methods of relaying information back to the spy masters were pretty high-tech. Nevertheless, the FBI picked up on their activities in January of 2010, a few months after her arrival in 2009. From January to June, FBI agents followed Chapman all around Manhattan. Whenever the van showed up and the driver pulled out their laptop, the agents made sure to pull out their cameras and take lots of photos of Chapman and the official typing away on their computers. Agents were also able to catch some of the wireless transmissions being sent from Chapman's device to the device in the van. On a couple occasions, the agents caught the van doing what the FBI calls a brush pass, which is when a vehicle passes by a stationary person transmitting information. Eventually, Chapman and the official noticed the surveillance personnel across the street while exchanging intel at a library. Chapman tried aborting the mission, but it was too late. The FBI already had enough evidence to make an arrest. Specifically, they'd identified 2 MAC IP addresses, which they called MAC address A and MAC address B, communicating on a network called Ad Hoc Network. Using the photos and network readings, the FBI created and released a report detailing their investigation into these unregistered spies after arresting them in 2010. Bourne Ultimatum had come out 3 years ago, so to many in the West, illegal spying was something Matt Damon did on their TV screens, not real life. When news broke that the FBI had busted 10 Russian spies living on U.S. soil, the media went crazy, writing story after story about the new generation of Russian and American spies. Of course, as time went on, the story died out, but the world's fascination with Anna Chapman did not. At first, the media politically roasted Chapman. Some outlets dubbed her the Red Under the Bed. The nickname is both an ode to the old Soviet colors and the bright red hues in Chapman's hair. In the end, the media, specifically social media, would become more interested in Chapman's beautiful hair than where she came from and who she spied for. That is, after her trial. Chapman's arrest played out like a Bourne movie. The setting was perfect. A coffee shop in Manhattan, a spy sitting on one side of the table, an undercover FBI agent sitting on the other. According to records, the agent asked Chapman, "Are you ready for this step?" Then he handed her a fake passport and instructed her to give it to another spy. Chapman took the passport and with it, an admission of guilt. When she got to her New York apartment, Chapman called her espionage veteran father, who could smell the trap all over the fake passport in his daughter's hand. Knowing she would be hunted if she tried to leave, Kushchenko instructed his daughter to turn herself in to the authorities. Chapman hung up the phone, held on to the passport. She went to the nearest police station, gave them the passport, and subtly offered her hands up to be cuffed by the police, who later turned Chapman over to the FBI. Authorities found Chapman and 9 others guilty of espionage, but instead of imprisoning them in the United States, the government decided they could use Chapman and company to broker a deal with Russia. Putin had 4 U.S. agents in Moscow locked up for espionage. These agents were actual professionals who the U.S. wanted back. So they flew Chapman and the other 9 spies to Vienna to make an exchange. After landing in Vienna, the 10 Russian spies were swapped for the 4 U.S. agents, and Chapman found herself on another plane, this one heading for home. Eventually, Chapman landed in Russia, her future unknown. She wasn't sure how Russia would receive her or what her life would be like now that millions of people knew her name and associated it with espionage of all things. Chapman would have to find a way to either capitalize on her newfound fame or let it ruminate in the public's mind and see what happens. Of the 2 routes, Chapman took the former. Back in 2010, Vice President Joe Biden went on The Tonight Show hosted by Jay Leno. The illegal story had just broken out, and Anna Chapman was the most discussed spy. So much so that Jay Leno asked Biden if we, the United States, had any spies as hot as Chapman. Biden replied, "Let me be clear, it was not my idea to send her back." Though Biden and Leno only saw her physical strengths, Chapman had much more to offer the media than just her body. As soon as she got back to Russia, the Federation set Chapman up with a job on the Council of Young Guard of Russia, an institution that aids in the education of Russia's youth. Months after her appointment to the YGR Council, Chapman landed an even bigger gig. She would host a TV show called Secrets of the World. And a few months after that, Chapman was appointed to the editor of a Russian magazine called Venture Business News. All of this appointing and hiring occurred from December 2010 to June 2011, just 7 months. However, a few years later, Chapman found her true medium, social media. Chapman's Instagram, @Anna.Chapman, boasts hundreds of thousands of followers. Chapman has posted over 1,200 times to build those followers, with almost every single post featuring her face. However, underneath those glamorous photos is the reason Chapman's Instagram has garnered so much controversy and interest from the media. These days, Chapman's captions focus on her many businesses and side hustles. These businesses include a clothing line, a successful modeling career, a YouTube channel, all of which seem to revolve around a self-help brand, complete with courses and inspiring captions written in Russian. Before Chapman started a campaign to share her own success, she was supporting someone else's campaign, Donald Trump. Amid Russiangate, Chapman was posting selfies with captions about Trump being backed by influential forces as those who back Clinton. She concluded her eloquently written caption by saying there will be no room for people like Clinton who have blood on their hands. In another caption, bolstered by a well-lit, glamorous photo, Chapman criticized American and European diplomats. She wrote that most of the Western diplomats are currently expressing their condolences to Russia over the death of our ambassador in Turkey, in which case she would really like to ask them, weren't you the ones accusing our country of made-up war crimes in Syria? These posts were from 2017. In 2020 and 2021, Chapman began gravitating more towards positive and uplifting messages. Of course, the visual aesthetic never changed. At the end of the day, getting caught for spying turned out to be the best thing that could have happened to Chapman. Today, Chapman still graces runways, has strong opinions, and runs several successful businesses, doing way better than Property Finder ever did. Click here to watch one of these next videos. And let us know in the comments section whether you think President Trump conspired directly with the Russians or not.